Hello, my name is Don Shaffer. I'm Director of African American Studies here at Mississippi State University. And I want to welcome all of you watching this discussion on the history and development of African American musical traditions that we are calling From Gospel to Hip Hop, a conversation on the intersections and impact of Black music in America. This is part of a four-part series on African American culture and lived experience as we celebrate Black history in the month of February. I'm joined today by two of my esteemed colleagues whose expertise in the subject area far exceeds my own, so I will do my best to stay out of their way as they share insights on African and African American musical traditions. First, it is my pleasure to introduce a man I've often referred to as drummer par excellence, a percussive savant, Dr. Robert J. Dahm. Dr. Dahm is Professor of Music and Director of Music Education Partnerships at MSU. He is also an affiliated faculty member in the African American Studies program. An active performer, his recitals have showcased many world music instruments such as African xylophones, berimbau, musical bow, cajon, congas, djembe, dombek, various frame drums, and steel drums. His programs have also featured diverse musical styles in which he played the marimba, vibraphone, timpani, multiple percussion, and drum set. He has studied music and culture in Cuba, Ghana, and Mali. He has published articles concerning the positive effects of drumming on children with autism, the djembe in Mali, Mississippi Hill country fife and drum, the bambula rhythm of New Orleans, the fanga rhythm and dance, classical, rudimental snare drum repertoire, samba, and the udu, musical clay pot of Nigeria. His current research is focused on drum circles as well as musical traditions of the African diaspora. Welcome, Dr. Dahm.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
My pleasure.
It's also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gary Packwood. Dr. Packwood is Associate Professor of Music and Director of Choral Activities and Graduate Coordinator in the Department of Music here at MSU. Dr. Packwood wears many hats. Perhaps a more appropriate analogy is he plays many parts. Inspirational and motivational conductor, pedagogue, lecturer. He has appeared throughout the United States as well as internationally in Brazil, Italy, Malaysia, France, Austria, and the Czech Republic. Wow, your passport must be stamped a whole lot. His recent engagements included guest conducting in Florida, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Tennessee. And that's not even his day job. We're getting to that. Dr. Packwood is currently Program Administrator and Director of Choral Studies at Mississippi State University, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate conducting and conducts all four of the university's choral ensembles. An accomplished maestro, he made his Carnegie Hall debut on Easter Sunday in 2012, conducting the Mississippi State University Singers and the New England Chamber Orchestra. A musical scholar, Dr. Packwood has published articles in the Choral Journal, Teaching Music, the second edition of the Amerigrove Dictionary, and is currently working on a project with GIA Publications. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So, as part of my early disclaimer, I said both of you are much more well-versed in the subject than me, but music is so integral to our culture and everyday lived experience that we're all aficionados of musical tastes and genres, at least to some degree. For instance, it's impossible for me to study African American culture and history without a robust acknowledgement of the ways in which the music of Black and brown folk has shaped the literature, the social movements, even the philosophies of Black and brown people. As a scholar of African American literature, I'm reminded of someone like Ralph Ellison, who uses the blues as a signifier for what it means to be Black in this country, who describes it as the music of invisibility that expresses the enduring but fraught experiences of Black people in this country. But it's also a music that in many ways represents so much more than simply those struggles. And I wanted to start by thinking about some of the connections, certainly between you know, African American music and American culture, and perhaps begin by talking about the integral quality of African American music, not only to the experience of Black people in this country, but to the country as a whole. So, Dr. Dom, I want to begin with you, because I think your research on the positive effects of drumming on children with autism has some relevance here. What is the legacy of African American musical forms and traditions, including its antecedents such as African drumming, in the United States?
Thank you for that question. The answer takes 15 weeks.
Yes, it does. It's a big question.
And it's a course called African American Music.
Mm-hmm.
So we begin with a discussion of life in Africa and the integral role of music in life. Everything from celebration to work, and all the rituals of the human experience that are transformed through music. Celebrating the naming of a baby, celebrating a marriage, celebrating the end of a successful harvest, and celebrating a life in a funeral. So all these events are transformed through music, and mark our days and our lives. So where do we go from there? What I spoke of briefly was just the importance of music in daily lives, and then also I think what the theme that will take us through all of our history in the United States is communication. The ability of music to allow us to communicate our feelings and to our stories. I think that's bound to be an important word today. Narrative, story, storyteller. And in Africa, someone whose role in the community as storyteller is known as a griot or jelly. That same function could take us up to the current hip-hop song, social commentary. How about if I step away now and take it back to you or to Dr. Packwood, whoever wants to jump in.
Absolutely. Dr. Packwood, your thoughts, the ways in which African American music is integral, certainly to African American culture, lived experience, but integral to American culture in really significant ways. It becomes fabric of who we are as a people.
Yeah, the role, as Dr. Dom mentioned, is celebratory in nature, but accompanies African Americans, and not just African Americans, but that music, the experience of it accompanies us in so many things that we do. And depending on how we break those genres down, if we start talking about the spiritual, then we can break that down into sometimes more specific means of communication that Dr. Dom mentioned earlier, that would be representative of part of that human experience. It's integral. You know, I think if we think about how much music we hear on a daily basis, that just gives you a broad range of music in general. But then we start thinking about African American music, and that to me there are traits, the rhythms and the melodies that move something in most people that other musics lack. Sometimes the repetition, the call and response, those things take us somewhere. we can often use music, as I believe, as a great healer. It is oftentimes we refer to certain songs in our lives for comfort. And we do that, especially if we're raised in the tradition of African American music, as I was as a young kid in church down in Baton Rouge. And that music had a significance with us at 7 o'clock in the morning when the church came in singing. It had a significance for us at Sunday school when we sang those closing hymns. It had a significance for us when we went to music, what we call musicals on Sunday afternoons. So it's communicative. It is part of our being, and because I think of African American music as being a true indigenous music to America, that makes it all the more significant.
Well, thank you, Dr. Packwood. Just to follow up on that question a little bit, I think both of you alluded to this a little bit, the ways in which African American music influences and is integral to American culture. What I've always found fascinating about Black vernacular forms, including various musical forms and genres, the blues, spirituals, is a way that they pull within themselves other influences so that you have these really unique cultural hybrid formations. And before we started, I was just talking with Dr. Dom, and I was asking him to help me pronounce a couple of these musical instruments, and I think one of them was the cajon. And he said, well, that's a Spanish word. So it's interesting how the music has sort of pulled in all these other cultural influences. And you spoke to this as well, Dr. Packwood. It's transformed them in lots of ways so that what we get, is a new thing, a new creation. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Dr. Dom, if you could talk a little bit about the ways in which African American music has pulled in all these other cultural influences, languages, places in the Caribbean, and certainly Spanish influences as well.
I'd like to pick it up right where you were and where Dr. Packwood left off with the celebration, and to tie in with your connection to other cultures. We find something every place that Africans traveled in the diaspora. And these characteristics, these central characteristics of the music that Dr. Packwood described of repetition and rhythm, those are African characteristics, as is the process of call and response. So then when we find Africans in new environments, surviving, doing their best to survive and maintain their culture, those elements are retained, but new elements, new instruments are brought in. And so in the case of cajon, the most important instrument for celebration was the drum. And in cases like Peru and Cuba, the drum was not available or sometimes outlawed. And so the cajon, that's the Spanish word meaning big box. So the Spanish were bringing to the colonies in South America everything that they needed, and they were transporting them in boxes, which would be discarded. To the African then, who did not have a drum, did not have the time or resources to have a drum, build a drum, a box became the drum. And many new styles of music evolved. So in Cuba, we know about the rumba, a Afro-Cuban form of recreational music. Similar styles in Peru, all because Africans bringing their traditions, their need to celebrate, their need to communicate, the need to bring people together, keep them together, in spite of the absence of a tool, a drum. So,
you should have brought your drum.
See, that's how it could happen.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so there's one example of a new tradition being formed out of the demands of life and the imperative to maintain culture and to, well, maintain culture and yet create new forms of expressing culture in the environment. So the cajon of Peru and Cuba, now an instrument seen everywhere. Churches, schools, music stores. One of my students was having a lesson on cajon, and his mother said, "I thought it was a modern instrument."
No. Yeah.
Brand new. And I didn't know that it had a history that went back hundreds of years. So thank you for that question.
Yeah. Dr. Packwood, you know, I have a question for you as someone who's well-versed in musical theory. I would get in a lot of trouble as a kid in church because I would often play different instruments. I would sometimes play the trumpet, sometimes play the drum, sometimes play the piano. And I remember once playing at a choir rehearsal, and I was playing something on my trumpet as part of this ensemble that we're going to do, and in comes running this older deacon, and he says, "I hear someone here playing the blues." And who was it? And I raised my hand. I said, "Sir, I wasn't playing the blues. I was playing Precious Lord." And he says, "Well, the way you play it is like you're playing the blues." And I thought about that as a kid, and I thought, you know, some of the changes that I had made, you know, just subtle changes with the blue notes, a little bit of syncopation here, changing up the time signature, it made it something different. Is that a characteristic of African American music, that it takes instruments that were, many of them created in places far away in Europe, musical forms, time signatures, and it riffs on them in such a way, or it signifies on them in such a way that it fundamentally alters those existing, you know, traditional forms?
Yeah, that's a great story. You know, let's just take gospel music for example. I grew up in a gospel church, and you know, gospel by its definition means good news. So the gospel music is one vehicle through which the ideas of Christianity has sort of been spread throughout the decades. So if we think about African-American gospel music form, it's a form that's sort of euphoric, it's rhythmic. Dr. Dom spoke to that. Spiritual music rooted in solo and responsive singing. But it's also germane in the development of rhythm and blues. So Black gospel and African-American freedom struggles, those both peaked, you know, at the same time post World War II. So, and just to give you a little bit of history, because I should have had my notes in front of me, but I'm gonna do what best I can. But so during the late 1800s, African-American churches in the southern United States, they started to fuse these various styles. In their worship, when they would worship, so they would they started off fusing African American spirituals, hymns, and these sacred songs. Which if you take a hymn basically is usually different texts, which we call strophic, set to several verses. So the music stays the same, but we change the verses. We sing "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound," and then we sing "Through many dangers, toils, and snares." So I jump to the fourth verse, but each verse has different words. Just the music stays the same. This music stays the same. So the types of music sung by gospel choirs follow this call and response type format. And the precursor to that was the African American spiritual. So they're always sort of, and Dr. Don spoke to this immediately on, they're always sort of drawing and pulling from each other. So if you jump to the 1930s, this is where you see what you mentioned, the blues sort of come in. We talk about Thomas Dorsey. You might know that name or you might not, but he wrote one of the most famous gospel songs ever. He wrote "Precious Lord, Take My Hands," and you just mentioned that. So, and he was, Thomas Dorsey was a blues and jazz musician. So he started to sort of fuse those things together. I remember as a kid when we sang "Precious Lord, Take My Hand" in church, someone, the leader would sing "Precious Lord," and very slow and drawn out, and lots of melismatic, the melody was very melismatic and lots of blues notes. And then when the church, not the choir, but the church came in singing it, it had a more rhythmic flow because, one person can do all those ad libs, two people, then it starts to sound a little juxtaposed and hard to understand. So the choir, the church would serve as the choir and sort of sing that in a hymn-based form. So you're exactly right. When we start thinking about gospel music, that it contains those elements of gospel and elements of blues. And as we go if we go later into 1930s and 1940s, we see that then these distinct types of gospel music come to form. We start to see the emergence of the gospel quartet style, which is, much like barbershop, where you have 4, maybe 5 singers, usually males, and they would sing these tight harmonies in that gospel style. So this was something that started to happen with the emergence of fusions of jazz and blues notes and rhythms together. Then you see traditional. You still have the traditional gospel style. You have the contemporary gospel style, and the contemporary gospel style is very popular still today, which is one person singing a gospel song. A contemporary gospel singer. People say, "I like contemporary gospel music." They usually mean a person, not necessarily a group. And then you have praise and worship, and that's very popular. And praise and worship really is extremely strophic, but it tends to be quite shorter. It may just be 2 phrases that one that let's say the band, usually in a praise and worship, it's a praise and worship band that might consist of 6 or 8 players and singers, and then the audience will sing that back, and it just repeats over and over and over. But gospel music was not just used in a religious context. We have to remember it was also used, as I mentioned earlier, for throughout the civil rights movement. It was used to attract people. People, they were drawn to that sound. It encouraged participation. It invigorated meetings. If you went to, if you watched films of those speakers, civil rights speakers, there was always music, and this gospel music that they would sing, or freedom songs too. This is where you start to see the marriage of freedom songs and gospel music as well. So this is just became very typical. So if we think about African American history, it has some. The history is connected to religion often, which is ultimately, I think, is rooted in the ethos of justice and freedom. So, but the African American religious community, the civil rights movement and the larger Black protests, traditionally, they were highly varied. They didn't all think the same. They were varied in their political makeup, ranging from people who were quite cautious to people who were outright militant. Gospel singers were deeply embedded in the Black churches and widely dispersed throughout the Black community. And none of these handy formations ever represented a undifferentiated, it was not undifferentiated or monolithic, yet all of it contained substantial elements of resistance. If you think about Martin Luther King Jr. and you think about Malcolm X, the end result was the idea of justice and freedom. The way in which it got there was often different.
Well, thank you, Dr. Peckwood. You raise an important point about the social, if not also the political function of Black music in this country. And I wanted to ask a question about that. Is there an inevitable tension between the platform that Black musicians are often given? And that platform, of course, is often controlled by, an industry that is not always interested in expressions of Blackness, but have a interest in selling records, making money, commercial interests, as it were. So there's always an inevitable tension, not just in terms of what the music can express or can say, but between the artist and his or her music. We hear stories about Black artists, who were disenfranchised, who were no longer in control of their musical product, didn't own it, as it were. And, I just saw a wonderful adaptation of August Wilson's play, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. It's all about, these amazing Black artists who didn't own any of their own music, and the frustration that sort of creates. So I wanted to ask both of you this question, are there these kinds of constraints placed on really any artist, but particularly Black artists, in terms of thinking about his or her music as an artistic expression, but also perhaps as a political and social expression, and the ways in which that can sometimes run counter to the interest of the industry? So I'll start with you, Dr. Don.
I just want to add a little more frame around that question, which I was thinking about Ma Rainey before you mentioned her, because Thomas Dorsey moved to Chicago, and it's there where he coined the term gospel music, and he established a publishing company, Thomas Dorsey Publishing. He created the first gospel choir. But before he did all that, he was Georgia Tom, or Barrelhouse Tom, playing piano for Ma Rainey. That's true. Yeah. So that takes us to Ma Rainey, and that tension or conflict between art and communication, or music and commentary, is so eloquently expressed in that movie, the adaptation of the play. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't seen that, it's a must-see right now. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. I used that song actually in teaching about blues, and the first generation of blues stars were women. The golden era of the blues featured Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, others. I don't know what else to say about that conflict that you just mentioned, but it makes me think of Colin Kaepernick and outside of music and art, but sports. And again, it seems like you're expected as an artist to make social commentary, to provide entertainment, to speak the truth, to be creative, and be an artist who expresses humankind's condition. And then all of a sudden, a segment of the society finds that truth uncomfortable. And the consequences, well, Colin Kaepernick, no longer a quarterback in the NFL. Ma Rainey seemed to maintain her control of her career through performing. And to what extent the movie expresses certain conditions exactly as they happened, I don't know, but certainly they do express a common situation of somebody trying to get rich off of a musician, the producers, the engineers, the sellers of the music, getting control of that music. So I don't think I'm adding anything to your commentary at this point, but your point is taken, and it's unfortunate that I guess at first artists are praised, and then at some point they're censored, or an artist is praised and given reinforcement, but doesn't gain the financial wealth and independence that comes from the art that she or he has expressed. Sure. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just add, you know, it's just particularly with Black artists, they, and when I say they, I mean record producers and such, expect minority people of color, Black artists, to accept what they're given, but not be treated equally paid of their white counterparts. And so that is something that has happened for years, and it continues to happen. And then I think another issue is the control over what the artist wants to produce or sing or play or whatever, and the subject matter. That becomes another issue. So much of, if we talk about hip hop or R&B or just many of the Black genres of that music, the subject matter deals with what they know. Artists are usually more successful when they express what they know. So if you express living in poverty and hearing gunshots or whatever it is that you know, or if it's sitting on a lake or growing up in the country, or whatever it is that a Black artist knows, whether it's in the city, in the country, whatever it is, and you express this, it is somewhere down the line deemed that it isn't going to make money. Or, as Dr. Dom said, it's going to make someone uncomfortable. And we've seen time and time and again where very famous artists have tried to be stifled in their expression. Prince is probably one of the more known artists who changed his name. You know, when he went through, he became The Sign. And there wasn't even a name for it. It was just, everyone said The Sign, because this was a way of him becoming, quote, a new artist, and then knowing that whatever he produced would, that he would have control over it. I believe that because of many of the experiences, the culture of Black America, our subject matters expressed through musical form are different, and therefore isn't even given the opportunity to be heard. And then there's the monetary part of it. Even if you are performing musics that a producer or a company may say is worthy to be heard, what you make on it is significantly less than your white counterpart, or it's not heard, and you are punished in a financial way. So I don't think that is very new, and I think it still happens, you know, to artists now. This balance of expression and censoring, and the monetary part of it, being paid, knowing your worth and being paid what your worth is, especially when you're comparing to someone who sells less records than you but makes more money than you. And the obvious difference is the color of your skin. That's the reality of what happens sometimes in our industry.
Thank you. So we have to talk about hip hop. It's in the title of our panel, and I'm a little nervous about this because in many ways I feel as though hip hop has passed me by. I think I'm becoming that crotchety voice of an older generation that wants to talk about the golden era of hip hop, who wants to talk about Prince, you know, and old school R&B, and my teenage boys want to talk about the latest hip hop acts. So I wanted to ask you a question about hip hop. Maybe this is not fair, but again, you know, that's the old crotchety man in me. Does hip hop have the same potential for creating social change in the way that Black musical traditions of the past have been able to? In the same way that the Negro spirituals and work songs were coded messages of liberation for Black people, in the same way the blues was a way of marshaling Black pain and suffering that was cathartic as well as transformational, in the same way rock and roll broke down racial barriers. In other words, can the young folks' music today do those things? And perhaps this is unfair, but I'm putting it out there.
I'll start. Well, I think if history teaches us anything, the simple answer is yes. Because the forms you named, spiritual and rock and roll, and when rock and roll artists who were popular at the time, at the peak of rock and roll, those folks, when they refused to play for segregated audiences, when they refused to play in places where all the band members couldn't stay in the same hotel, those type of things, when they refused those those performances, and they knew their popularity, and then the promoters yielded to their demands, then yes, that changed. It helped society move forward. And I'm like you. As a matter of fact, the kids have started calling me Paw Paw around here because my time with hip hop has passed me by too. But I recognize and I have to respect that I see all kinds of students and young adults listening to hip hop now, and that evidence combined with what we know about the history of how it brought people together and made significant change. So if I have those two pieces of evidence, my answer would be absolutely 100%. I think we now realize that hip hop has been around a long time and is here to stay. And we can point to many instances of positivity through that, whether it's the songs, the lyrics, the marriage. Sometimes, now you have hip hop that'll do what do they call it when they cross genres, and they'll do it with the country sing. You see this all the time on award shows where they'll take a country singer and a hip hop singer, and they'll do a little country and they'll do a little hip hop, and they'll reverse the roles, and the audience can. Yeah, thank you. There you go. Yeah. And those mashups, I think, are great for bringing people together, because sometimes, if I'm someone who solely listens to hip hop, and now I hear a country song with my favorite hip hop singer singing it, I might take another look at that, and I also might, in the long run, think differently about someone who listens to different music than I do.
I certainly don't disagree, Dr. Packwood. I struggle to think that Drake, who I love, I think is awesome, will be transformational in the way that Marvin Gaye and James Brown was for the civil rights movement. I could be wrong. And again, is it fair to make these comparisons? Absolutely not. But here I am making these comparisons.
Listen,
Don?
Go ahead.
Africa Bambaataa, I call the rapper a postmodern griot. Mm-hmm. And so we still need the griot to tell our story, to make social commentary. In a fairly recent song, Kendrick Lamar said, "I'm African American, I'm African, I'm black as the moon, heritage of a small village." So engaging with Africa as a place of significance and a source of inspiration, and at the same time celebrating Compton and addressing bigotry. So some of the themes that I mentioned early in our conversation, storytelling, social commentary, it seems that it's most effectively being done by the hip hop artists of today. One of the discussion topics in this semester's African American music is a comparison of Tupac Changes with, I forgot the name of the song. Changes samples a song from about 10 years earlier that was done by Bruce Hornsby. And so Bruce Hornsby sings a song in a pop style about poverty and racism.
Sure.
but he's an outsider looking in. Tupac samples that song and then raps about those issues in a way that is way more effective at getting the listener to feel those issues. So if I could talk about one other artist, I think it's 2013, maybe that's old school by now, but I'm thinking of J. Cole and Crooked Smile.
Yeah.
And so first just talking about his teeth, and then talking about identity and success and the fact that he had become successful, and people are saying, well, you know, you can get your teeth fixed, and he says, well, I want to show people that you can be yourself and be successful. And then he starts talking about second verse and talking about women and the pressures that they're under because of media to look a certain way. And he says, you know, you have to love yourself and be yourself, and talking about inner beauty. And then finally, talking about our country, you know, and that's really the crooked smile. Exactly. That needs to be fixed. So to say, can a hip-hop artist change the world? I mean, a song like that hits me. I'm just, you know, I didn't realize it, but thinking about the stress that I feel right now in this country, about the injustice that seems to be all around us, and not called out for what it is, and not persecuted for what it is, and not convicted for what it is. At the highest level. These songs convey it to me in a way, the truth, convey that truth. So I'm confident that hip-hop will continue to do what you said James Brown did. So that's my response. Thanks.
Sure, sure. You know, just to come clean, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I think hip-hop has tremendous influence and potential for social change. You mentioned Kendrick Lamar. He won a Pulitzer for that album, for Damn. J. Cole, you know, one of my favorite artists. Now, I could push my line a little bit and say these are throwback artists.
Yeah, yeah.
In a lot of ways. But they are a part of this varied and robust hip-hop culture. I mean, Drake is in no way necessarily representative, entirely representative of this culture. It is varied, it is diverse, and there are any number of artists, you know, who are doing some of the very things that both of you are talking about. We have just a couple more minutes. I wanted to end by asking you all to just personally reflect a little bit, you know, on your own relationship, you know, your personal relationship to Black and African American musical forms and traditions. What are some of the ways in which that tradition amplifies, transforms, destroys, and creates again who you take yourself to be as a teacher, as a musician, as a scholar? You know, we always say that, you know, when you look into a work of art, it looks back into you. So what are some of the ways in which this music and this tradition, you know, has made you reflective of who you are or who you want to be?
Should I go first this time?
Yes.
That way Dr. Packwood can have the last word today. And off camera, you in fact, even before we met, you asked the idea, what is African American music? And some people might say, well, that's any music that's performed by African Americans. That's a legitimate, valid definition. But there are lots of styles that originated with African Americans and then became American music. And jazz and blues. And that's music that is my music. That's the music that means the most to me. And we had a similar discussion at lunch today, Gary Packwood and I, talking about appropriation, and that's a serious problem. But in my case, the music that means the most to me came to me in relationships with people. And so when I was taught how to play an African drum, or when I was taught the chord changes to the blues, or when I was taught how to compose the words to a blues song, or to discussions about the feeling of blues. These were discussions with people that I respect and love, and through these people the music was shared with me. And so I would like to think that I'm not stealing that music, that it was given to me and shared with me, and because I acknowledge where it came from, that is why I can say it's my music. Although, people don't know who I am, they don't know where I came from, they don't know, they don't see me playing in a blues band, in a shack in the Delta, or at a blues festival in Clarksdale, or even in a restaurant in Starkville. So the question of whose music is it? Well, we can say it's our music, but I would have to say it's our music because of the experience of African Americans whose lived experience gave us that musical expression.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you broached the subject. Full disclosure, I had an appropriation question and I backed off of it. I'm very glad that you touched upon that subject, and I thought what you said was deeply personal and honest. And I can attest, to your relationship to that music, and I think it's one of mutual respect and admiration. So thank you for that, and I can also attest to some of the things that you've done, and this is one of my favorite, events that you've done. I guess this is about 8 years, now. So thank you for everything that you've done, to promote, African music, African drumming. Dr. Packwood, you have the last word.
Can you hear him? You're muted, bro.
I told you they call me Paw. I can't figure out computers or anything.
It's okay.
But I agree so much with my colleague, Dr. Dom, on the idea of sharing this music. I can't imagine in a world, especially in which I live, that I wouldn't want to share the most spiritual and the most deeply meaningful music of my life with my students, or with the thousands and thousands of students and music professionals that I work with around the world. I think we have a problem when we get into misappropriation of music. It is the music of my ancestors that I am thrilled to share with anyone who wants to genuinely understand history and culture and experience that music. And so all of us, have to work. We have to work harder at wanting to understand the music, but the history and the culture, and share it with one another. I'll say this: I was doing a Zoom with a university choir that was. I shared the story with Dr. Don today. I won't be specific, but they didn't feel comfortable singing a spiritual-like song because they weren't Black students, and I was brought in to sort of talk about appropriating and sort of just this history and why it is so important that we share this music. But I believe we don't just sing it, that we have to understand it, we have to respect it. And that's the way forward for correcting injustices. That's the way forward for we as a people to continue to move forward, regardless of the times around us. We have to continue to share. I think that's the biggest message, that we share this music with one another, and it's not kept and hidden away.
Thank you, Dr. Packwood. And if only both of you had been there to defend me against Deacon Benson, who said that I had turned the church into a blues juke joint jam session. You all could have told him that Thomas Dorsey, got his start playing the blues, but it's okay. I took my chiding, I think, pretty well. Thank you both again, Dr. Packwood, Dr. Dom, for joining me, for this discussion. I learned a lot. I have a lot of reading and thinking to do. So thank you both for challenging me to think a little bit more about this musical tradition and some of the questions and issues that we've raised today. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Donald.
Thank you. Thank you. So that concludes our discussion. I hope that it's also given you all something to think about, as much as it's challenged me as well. And I hope that you will join us again. We have 3 other panel discussions that this is part of a 4-part panel discussion. And you can access those other discussions on our website. Thanks.